This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
I understand why the government's done what it's done, because there's so lack of money now in the councils that they've got to do something. They've got no choice. And of course, the situation with the unitary authorities is they've been going now for quite a few years under previous governments as well. Do I support elected mayor? I like the idea of responsibilities being devolved down to the county and to the boroughs, if they were one, or in this case, it's new unitary authorities. But under the power of one person making the whole decision is the right answer. I think it's got to be much wider than that.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast. In the week, Kent and Medway missed out on the first round of devolution. A former MP revealed he hopes to make a comeback, and it's council budget time again. My name is Simon Finlay, local democracy reporter covering Kent County Council, and with me is Robert Boddy, who looks after Medway Council.
Hello.
And Dan Essen, who covers borough and district councils in the county.
Hello.
And also joining us is KM Media Group Senior News Editor Nikki White.
Hello.
Our special guest this week is KCC Liberal Democrat Councillor Ian Chittenden. Robert, what's been happening in your day job?
Well, it's coming up to everyone's favourite time of year, which is budget time. Unfortunately, the publication of Medway Council's budget proposals for next financial year are slightly delayed due to the by-elections. However, we have been able to see the latest round of monitoring for the current year's budget, and although things are better than they were, it's not overwhelmingly positive.
For the uninitiated, could you just explain what monitoring is and what we've found out this week as a result?
So monitoring is basically just keeping track of how closely Medway Council has stuck to the budget it set itself in February last year. In an ideal world, a council would find it had overestimated its costs and would be underspending. However, for Medway, this hasn't been the case. The third round has revealed Medway has a predicted £8 million overspend on its budget for this year, which it really needs to get down before February.
So what happens if they don't, and how likely are they to get rid of it?
So if they don't get the overspend down, we go back to the fan favourite Section 114 order, which is effective bankruptcy. However, the likelihood is more in favour of Medway scraping through with some careful financial finagling. This year was predicted to overspend by £11.2 million back in November, so the figures are moving in the right direction. Regular listeners will recall that Medway has often been predicted massive overspends and has always gotten by. Last year they used reserves, some from the standard pot and others from ring-fence funds, which were no longer needed for their original purpose, to balance the books. Currently the council has £10 million in reserves, which could cover this overspend. However, there is a requirement to have £1 million of £10 million in the bank, so that's not really a solution. There's still time for the overspend to be resolved, but it's really getting close to the wire.
Dan, what's caught your eye?
I've yet again been paying attention to the antics at Folkestone Hive District Council, but this time I've been watching their long-awaited restructure get broken upon the rocks of the government's new devolution plans to the tune of about 70 grand for the council.
I think we've covered this on here before, but can you just briefly remind us what's going on?
So the Green Lib Dem minority administration, which took over Folkestone Hive Council in 2023, promised in their manifestos to move from a cabinet structure to a committee one, as did the local Labour Party. Basically because of the previous Tory cabinet's controversial moves on Princess Parade development, every other party turned against cabinet systems and instead back to committee one, where decision-making is nominally given to cross-party committees rather than any one individual person. And it makes responsibility for decisions quite diffuse. In 2023, they voted to officially make that change by May the next year with a budget of 100 grand available to do it. In January 2024, the administration conceded they wouldn't be in a position to actually start running things that way by May, so they asked for yet more delay until May 2025, attracting the ire of pretty much everyone. But given the new devolution proposals, there was yet another motion last week calling to ditch the whole thing.
So what's the politics of it, and how did the debate play out?
So the Tory group were always opposed to the restructure, and they proposed the motion. Basically, they said since Folkestone Hive District Council is going to be abolished and subsumed into a larger East Kent Council, it's a waste of time and money to completely reorganise the way the council is run, when the council is going to disappear quite soon. Oddly enough, the Greens, who were proponents of this change for a long time and thought it was basically a solution to all the council's ailments, seem to finally think the same, and they also backed the motion to scrap the transition. But Labour were insistent that even if Folkestone Hive District Council's lined up for the chopping block. It would still be better to have a committee system for its twilight years. But nonetheless, the council voted to scrap the change, meaning the 70k or so of legal fees they've spent on it was pretty much wasted. But clearly they would rather the waste they know. But given the news that we got just today about devolution, if they haven't sent their letter yet to the local government secretary asking to cancel the transition, maybe they'll change their minds.
So what's been happening on your patch, Simon?
It's not so much what's been happening on the patch, because obviously what's been happening on the patch is quite big news, but we'll come to that in a little while, the whole business about Kent not being chosen for the priority programme in devolution. But I did have an intriguing conversation with the former MP for Gravesham, Adam Holloway, who says that he might have another tilt at the seat again at the next general election. He's already said that he would be, he would have considered a KCC seat, in which case, he may have a go in May, or even the mayoralty when that happens in Kent. But he lost his seat quite narrowly to Labour's Dr. Lauren Sullivan, who's also a Kent County Councillor, last July, but with a very slender majority of less than 3,000. And bearing in mind, he once had a huge majority of nearly 16,000, huge for that particular constituency anyway, and served 5 separate parliaments. He probably thinks he has a shout. Anyway, so he obviously he would have to get on the candidates list, and then he would have to be selected by the local association.
And why does he think that he can win?
Well, he has a wealth of experience on the patch. He's very well known, and he says he knows a lot of people, and as he put it, it would be a waste if he didn't have a go. He clearly thinks that Labour is likely to be very vulnerable in 2029, and interestingly, Gravesham, according to electoral calculus, is the only seat in Kent the Conservatives would actually win back.
Do you think any other Tories would reconsider going back to have another go?
It's difficult to see who might want to do it. Damien Collins at Folkestone Hive could be a good shout, but pollsters are saying that one could well go to Reform UK as well. You look at Damien Green, has already indicated he's had enough, and Ashford is also tipped to fall to Reform UK from Labour as well. So of all the seats, Adam Holloway's former bill at Gravesham might be a decent shout, actually. What have you been looking at this week, Nikki?
So we're all familiar with the headlines about crime, but when we think about it, we tend to automatically think about shoplifting and antisocial behaviour or just crime generally in towns. But it isn't just a problem in built-up areas. Rural crime is a growing concern too, and this week Faversham and Mid-Kent MP Helen Whately, she's been visiting a farm in her constituency to find out more. She said she'd raised all the concerns that constituents had flagged with her with the Kent Police Rural Task Force, and they've been updating her on their recent work, which has included seizing hair coursing kits, recovering stolen machinery and investigating fly tippers, as well as seizing weapons. Miss Whately said people had raised issues about catapult attacks and even the theft of village signs. It seems nothing is safe. On the problem of catapults, she said that police had told her about their frustration of seizing these dangerous items, but then they're having to give them back to the people they've taken them from because it's not actually illegal to have one. So she's now pushing in Parliament for catapults to be classified as offensive weapons. That would make them illegal to have them in a public place without reasonable excuse and give the police a bit more power. So she also spoke with a local farmer to hear about the problems he has and many others like him face on a regular basis. And it's things sort of like rubbish being dumped illegally on their land and through to attacks on livestock. So she said the police were doing their best to crack down on these problems and respond to them quickly. So, for example, to help with their response rate, they've launched WhatsApp group chats with a lot of local farmers. So not only have they got a direct channel between them and between each other, but they can also report the crimes more quickly.
Farming's tough enough. Having to deal with these sorts of crimes is something they really shouldn't have to deal with, is it?
Yeah, Miss Whately spoke to a farmer who said he'd had 30 sheep killed one Christmas Day by dogs which were off their lead. So it's just making sure that owners are looking after their dogs and making sure that they're on leads around livestock. He'd also had another 3 sheep which had died, and he's convinced that was a result of someone who'd gone poaching with a catapult. And also they've also got the cost of clearing up fly tipping on a regular basis, which is another issue. All that money just adds up, and ultimately that cost is going to be passed on to the likes of you and me, because the farmer will need to then pass that cost on to his supplier, and we just end up paying more for our food.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Local government in Kent is to undergo its biggest upheaval in half a century in the coming months and years ahead. There is the likely prospect of a directly elected mayor as early as next year, and the abolition of every council, all 14 of them, in the county. and one wise owl will be part of that, watching and sharing his thoughts. So welcome Ian Chittenden, who sits as a Liberal Democrat on Kent County Council. Nice to see you, Ian.
Good morning, Simon. Nice to hear from you.
Thanks for coming on. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. Are you and your party going to be ready for it?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we've been sitting here for the last month ready for what was going to be elections, and we've had the opportunity to have a lot of discussions. Basically, not actually finally knowing exactly what we've got to discuss, and that will, hopefully we may get that today. We're not sure. But yes, we will be ready, and we've certainly been planning. Okay.
Just tell us a little bit about your background, Ian. Are you originally from Kent? What's your history?
I was born in Guildford in 1948, so I'm 79 years old now, getting old. I'm married and moved into Medway in 1969 and then moved to Maidstone in 1974. I've lived here for 50 years. I've got 2 grown-up children. I did 4 years at college. I had a diploma in building management and structural design. I was a senior construction manager running a whole series of sites for the past 42 years, including with people like Wimpey, Tarmac and Cllr, all commercial stuff. And I retired about 12 years ago.
So you know quite a bit about the mechanics of building, and there's been plenty of that around the Maidstone area in recent years. It must give you a bit of an insight.
Yes, it certainly does. I know what goes on, and I know the problems that you need and why things seem to take so long as well, whether it's planning or whether it's the construction, and of course how everything integrates in relation to the structural side, the roads, etc. Because that basically was my job. It said it wasn't with housing. Okay. So yes, got an insight certainly. Yeah. So can you remember what sort of first sparked your interest in politics? Was it a particular character? Yeah, no, it wasn't a character, actually, because at one time, I must admit, when I was younger, I supported the Tory party, but that didn't last long. I was living on Vinters Park, and across from me was a lovely fruit farm. And Sainsbury's and Homebase tried to put a complete major development of warehousing onto that fruit farm. So locally we got together and decided to fight it. I chaired it for 18 months. We fought hard against the council and we won. And then we went to the appeal and we won that as well. And the people that helped me were the Liberal Democrats, and the Tories were for it. So just after that I was asked by Liberal Democrats if I'd like to join them. And I'll be honest, I thought about it and then jumped at the chance because I thought they'd done such a good job helping us.
So that was because of something happening at the grassroots, if you like. You know, would you say the Liberal Democrats, was it because of the ideology or just because they had given you a bit of a hand?
No, not only that. I by that time I was a little bit older than, my parents were originally Conservative, or they turned Liberal Democrat later. But it was all about their Liberal Democrat space in politics. I'm very middle of the road. I'm slightly middle of centre. And of course, that suits the Liberal Democrat quite well. Certainly doesn't. I'm certainly not left wing. I'm certainly not right wing. Yeah. But yeah, that suits my ground. So yeah, I'm pleased that I joined them and nothing else.
Yeah. Why do you think that they've been fairly consistently strong in the Maidstone area?
Well, they have been for a long time. I mean, I've been involved for about 30 years now, or 24, just under 30 years. But they had a strong position before. Sometimes we were as high as 22, 24 people. But you've always had a good core of people, and that's continued, and it still is now. We're building up another new core. And we fight hard. We know that the only way we can win in Maidstone, have always known it, is 1, tell people what we do, and 2, go out and do what we say we're going to do. And the only way to do that is to go and solve things and help the residents. And we have that reputation. It's always stuck with us. We work hard on, and I think that's still the case with Lib Dem councillors. Is why for 20. I will say I've been a campaign manager for 20 years. So that's
I forgot that. Yes, you do tend to be the campaign manager. You sort of coordinate everything and get the troops on the ground.
That's right, but it is a team effort. It really is. We have a good team. They do change from time to time, and some disappear through old age, etc. But we've got a young team coming up. And I've done that for 20 years. I've enjoyed doing it. At the time I didn't do it, of course, was in this general elections when I stood back and let others with more understanding of that area to do the work. But yeah, it's worked well.
Yeah, you've been around local politics in that area for quite a long time. I mean, the one thing that's been a constant in recent years, particularly at the county council, has been the struggle to balance the books. Why do you think successive governments have failed to fund local authorities in the face of, soaring costs, especially for things like adult social care and SEND?
Yeah, it started about 12 years ago, I think. I'm thinking back in about 12 years, when the governments decided that was the policy they wanted to do, was cut lending, or cut borrowing rather. And they started by cutting the money that's coming to councils. And that's one of the way they were doing it. If they didn't give the council so much money from the if you like, the taxes that we put through our councils every year, then of course they could cut the borrowing. And unfortunately, they just kept going and going and going at it till finally that virtually there's no basic income from the government except what we bid for in grants. And that means the borough council and the county council have suffered the same. And it's just gone too far. They've gone too far with it to the point where we are absolutely starved of money, both counties and boroughs. If
the Lib Dems had been in charge of the county council, for example, what would you have done differently?
That's a really good question. At times we've asked for different things to be prioritised. When I first came into this, I was very upset that there was a lot of basic things that weren't being done properly, like roads and highways were not being supported at the time when we had the money. And it was put on, how can I put this, especially in the early days, it was put onto projects that brought the votes in, that really worked with the residents, but actually didn't keep the services up. And that went on for quite a long time, in certainly early days. In the latter days, I think, especially the last few 5 years, it had been a fight to know what different we would do. But there's always been some differences, there's things like social services, which have been not had enough money. But to be honest, I think that's really more government-led because they've never changed the priorities which they promised they do. Things like youth services, I would have liked to see youth services with some more money and take away some of these things which residents like but actually don't help the services, as I said before. So individual elements, bit difficult to tell because you've got a whole spectrum you could choose from. And each year we do look at it and make recommendation, and each year for 90% of the time, the Tories outvote it.
Yeah. It looks as if, as early as next year, we could have an elected mayor in Kent. Do you support the idea of an elected mayor?
No, I don't at all, unfortunately. I understand why the government's done what it's done because there's so lack of money now in the councils that they've got to do something. They've got no choice. And of course, the situation with the unitary authorities is they've been going now for quite a few years under previous governments as well. Do I support an elected mayor? I like the idea of responsibilities being devolved down to the county and to the boroughs, if they were one, or in this case, it's new unitary authorities, but under the power of one person making the whole decision is the right answer. I think it's got to be much wider than that. And it scares me a bit. I know we've seen successes with Andy Burnham and the Mayor of London. I mean, they're great successes. But I suspect when we start to do more research, which is what we're going to do, and look at these successes and failures of the various councils and what they would do and won't do, so we can start the debate properly with the Conservatives and others, I think we'll be finding a lot of failures as well as the one or two headline-catching successes.
Okay. If all 14 councils are to be abolished, and that seems fairly likely, how many unitaries would be the best or most efficient to run Kent? I mean, some people say 3, some people say 2, some people even say 4. I mean, where do you think you would...
Well, I don't think we could do it to 2. Not if you're going to control it, probably. It's going to be hard enough with 3 or 4. With 3, it certainly meets the criteria set by the government at the moment, which they want at least 500,000.
Per authority,
Per authority. And there's if you have 3 authorities, you easily meet that criteria. If you have 4 and also actually you can use it. The other criteria they've set is to use existing boundaries of existing councils.
Yeah.
And that would meet with a little bit of tiny juggling. That would actually could be met. If you've got 4, you're going to have to start breaking up the boroughs and redoing their boundaries as well. So it's going to be a much more major exercise. And basically, you won't get them all having the 500,000. So, I mean, from my point of view, and I feel from Maidstone's point of view, although I'm not talking for everybody, I would suggest that we'd favour the 3 rather than the 4. And I think for those reasons, that's what the government wants. We go with the government criteria. And to be honest, it seems the best way because it's going to be complicated enough as it is without starting breaking up all the authorities and starting the boundary changes again. That just had a big additional workload to it.
Yeah, okay. The Conservative leadership at KCC seems to be averse to the idea of having elections this May. Should we have them or, would it just end up being a huge waste of money?
Well, the last election 4 years ago was for 4 years. And from my point of view, I know the Conservatives are saying that if we stay on, it'll be another year. But in my opinion, I think it will be actually 2 years. And I think that's now most people's opinion. And I don't think that's wrong not to give the electorate a chance. And as we know from the current state of affairs compared where we were, say, even a year ago, the thoughts of the electorate, who they want to vote for, has changed substantially. And I think on that basis, the elections should go ahead.
Yeah, okay. No, I think that's been a fairly consistent viewpoint of most Liberal Democrats you speak to. Do you think the new authorities, should be elected on a PR system? I mean, no one has actually said it's going to be first past the post, but nobody said it's going to be, PR or some form of STV or whatever. But if you did, surely that would massively favour Reform UK.
Well, it might do, but I'll be honest, I'm going to take a rain check on that one because I've not actually thought that one out. We had assumed it would be a straightforward election, not a PR. But then, on the other hand, as a party, we completely support proportional representation.
But sometimes
it's really a quandary, and I hadn't really thought so.
Well, let me just put it another way. In some ways, there's an argument, and I think it has been practiced elsewhere, that you have a form of PR to begin with in order to get as many different parties around the table. So there's a bit of, there's a feeling that everyone's got a bit of agency, a bit of participation in the process as it gets underway. And then you revert to a more kind of like straightforward first past the post system. I mean, is there some argument for that?
The trouble is there's going to be so many changes going on in the next 3 years. I suppose you're saying that in 2 years' time, when they perhaps had the first vote for the unitary, there wouldn't be another vote for 4 years. So you could change it from one time. So you could actually have that change. I don't like the idea of continual changes. I think it disrupts a lot of things, including the operation of how the councils work. I think we've got to choose one and be consistent with it, in my opinion. But
do you think that the Lib Dems can ever be the true party of government on a national level?
Well, you asked me a few years ago, and I would have said, well, they've got a hell of a way to go. But
true.
72 seats, and we're not just planning to keep those seats in whatever the next election comes along. When the next election comes along, we're planning for the next level, to go to the next level. It's possible. Whether we can do it in one more jump is another matter. My own feeling would be that it's possible, but I would have thought perhaps we'd end up joining with one of the other parties, but which one, I don't know. It definitely wouldn't be Reform. In that way. But
you picked up, Mike Warren picked up the seats in Tunbridge Wells. Are there any other target seats in Kent that you'd be putting your eye on?
I think you've got something like Canterbury, which is very pro-Lib Dem and has got a good base from which to work and a good group of people.
Are you talking about Rosie Duffield's seat?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
That's correct. Whether we do Maidstone, we've got to do a lot better. We didn't do well in this general election. I have to say I wasn't involved, but we didn't do well in this general election for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go into it, but I think with the right candidate, getting in there 2 years early which is one of the things we didn't do, I think Maidstone could be a fight. I think that there's the support of us in Maidstone. There's just not the support at national level. So I would have thought Canterbury was the favourite, and the other one is Sevenoaks. I think Richard Stretfield there and others are gaining a good reputation in that area.
Okay.
So we have possibilities.
That's really, really interesting, isn't it? Because funnily enough, Maidstone and Malling, the current polling, and this polling as it stands today, Maidstone and Malling is going to fall to reform, if they're to be believed. I
think we will put up a very, very strong fight in Maidstone as a whole. And it may say they think that's going to be, but it's not going to be without a fight, I don't think. And I think at the time we get to unitary authorities, reform have got to go a long way.
Yeah.
They're saying what the people want to hear, doing like what the Tories did for many. Tell them what they want to hear. Let's separate it, etc., etc. And I think that's exactly what they're doing here. They've got to put some meat on that bone, because I'm not sure they can. Not the sort of thing they're recommending they're going to do. Yeah. And I think in 2 years they've got to. I'm not sure they're going to be in the same position. We saw it with UKIP, and I think to some extent that that party's going to go pretty much the same, but only time will tell, unfortunately. Okay. Ian Chittenden, been lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. I bet so. Thank you very much. No problem. On Wednesday, we heard that Kent was going to miss out on the government's devolution priority programme, and this came as a bit of a bitter disappointment to the leaders of Kent County Council and Medway Council, Roger Goff and Vince Maple, who were the architects of the bid. It does mean that Kent will not get as good a deal as others in terms of funding, powers and responsibilities. Dan, what do you make of all this? I mean, you've been following this quite closely.
I'm quite surprised that Kent didn't get chosen for the first round, not least because other counties on either side of it have Essex.
Yeah, in the south east especially.
Yeah, both halves of Sussex and Surrey have been chosen for the first round. And also, since the rationale of the reform is to simplify the structures of local government, Kent is one of the largest two-tier arrangements in the entire country. There's 12 district councils, a county council and a unitary authority within the area, which is going to be split up. So if they wanted to simplify things, here seems like a pretty good place to start. But conversely, they just put a bid to the government explaining, how they would go about running new unitary authorities created out of the existing ones. And so presumably there must have been some kind of technical problem with the bid, whether it's sort of geographical alignments of them or insufficient funding plans. It's quite ambiguous at the moment. It's
been quite difficult to find out what reasons were given to Roger and Vince when the minister got in contact on Wednesday, and we've yet to sort of get to the bottom of that. But Kent was assumed to be a bit of a shoe-in. And I can only just guess, and it is guesswork, and it's based on what people have said. There's maybe because more councils than originally thought applied for the fast track and were able to present a better argument than Kent. Others have said that the Boundary Commission may have concerns about how to carve the county up into the 3 or possibly 4 unitary authorities. But the one thing that is going to happen, and this is the interesting thing from a political point of view, is there will be an election in May. Now, the Tories aren't expected to do terribly well. They've been in charge for quite a long time. They've got a massive amount of, councillors, 60 of the 80 at KCC, and many of them are either standing down or don't fancy the chances of winning the seats if they do stand. So I'm not saying they're going to get obliterated, but they do think that it's going to be a very, very difficult election for them. So who knows who's going to be in charge when that's all over. So it would be interesting to hear from you, Rob, where you think Medway stands in all of this.
Well, I think Medway's quite an interesting place in terms of, as you mentioned, Vince Maple was part of putting together this bid. Originally, he had been quite against the idea of having a Kent-wide mayor. He came around to the idea and really made a point that Kent and Medway wanted to get on this priority list because that's where sort of the real gains would be at the forefront of this devolution package. He said he was bitterly disappointed about the fact that they're not on the list. He was a little bit more tempered in his language. I think Roger Goff said that the rationale was confusing, I think was the...
insufficient.
Insufficient. Whereas Vince has gone for... He seeks further explanation and clarity about why this decision has been made. I think Vince also called it particularly frustrating that the 1.9 million people of Kent will be denied access to resources and devolved opportunities.
It's interesting because at one stage, we understand that a 4 unitary authority model was being looked at, carved up. Maybe it was something to do with how difficult Kent might be to carve up, given its sort of electoral.
I definitely think that's played a role in this, because I mean there's lots of suggestions of what might determine where the boundaries were of the unitary authorities and that sort of thing, and there's lots of overlapping boundaries of whether it's to do with health or whether it's to do it with other elements.
I think it's neater, isn't it? It's neater if you just stick to the boundaries already set by the district and the borough councils, and don't waver too much about it, or you try and take a geographical split using the county council divisions. I mean, whichever way you do it, I mean, Kent is a big county and it's got nearly 2 million people. And I suppose the argument for having a 4th unitary authority means that you would soak up any population growth that would come after, whereas you would have 3 with, 600,000 plus.
Yeah, and I think one of the things which I think has been will be particularly frustrating with this whole process is that I think we certainly assumed that Kent would be on this priority list.
I did, yes.
All the indications seemed to be that was, when the first leaks started to come out a couple of months ago, Kent was one of those that was mentioned about possibly delaying elections being at the forefront. So I think there is a certain sense of we've been marched to the top of the hill and we're being told to march all the way back down again, which I think a lot of council leaders, and particularly in Medway, will find quite frustrating.
It must be terribly frustrating, especially for those who weren't on board with the idea to start off with, to have put all that work in, thoroughly believed that you were going to be at the front and of the queue, and now you're being told actually no. And I know there's never any guarantees in anything, and particularly politics, but yeah, it must have been incredibly frustrating for people. And everybody wants to be first. It's about having that shiny new toy and being at the forefront and being the trailblazer. And you would perhaps rightly or wrongly assume that you're going to get a big wad of money and a lot of attention from government, because they want to make sure this works. They want to make sure that this happens and it's a success. So you would think that you're going to be one of the favoured few. But it might turn out to be a good thing. The Kent councils might be breathing a sigh of relief in the not so distant future, because if it all goes horribly wrong, they might be quite glad that they're on the second or third wave coming through, because then all the lessons will have been learned and they won't have had to have suffered the consequences of it.
But the mayoral model, that devolved sort of model, whichever way it happens to evolve, seems to have worked quite well, especially up in Manchester and maybe Birmingham. It's done okay.
It has, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to apply for what suits us down here in Kent. We are very different. We have different borders and different needs, as we so often say. We're closer to France than we are to some of our other people in other English counties, and we have different demands. So what works in one part of the country isn't necessarily going to work here. Okay, well, needless to say, we'll keep you all posted as and when we hear anything. Okay, folks, that's it for this week. Thanks to Nikki, Rob, Dan and Ian Chittenden. And don't forget to keep an eye on Politics Online /Politics for the latest news from across the county. And you can also sign up for our newly launched Politics Briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. And don't miss KMTV's Politics show every Friday at 5 p.m. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show with Rob Bailey on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.